The gravy was still steaming when Harold cleared his throat and turned our world upside down. "I have something to tell everyone," he announced, his voice oddly steady for a man about to demolish 4 decades of marriage. Our children froze, forks suspended midair. I remember thinking how strange it was that the cranberry sauce hadn't even been passed around yet. 45 years of marriage, and he couldn't wait until dessert. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Margaret and I have been seeing each other for 12 years now, Harold continued, as calmly as if discussing the weather forecast. And we've decided it's time to start our life together properly. Our son Robert's wife gasped. Our daughter Claire dropped her napkin. Our grandchildren stared, wide-eyed, absorbing every second of this family implosion. And me? I sat perfectly still, my wedding ring suddenly heavy on my finger, watching my husband of 45 years destroy everything we'd built together over mashed potatoes and turkey. What Harold didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment for 20 years. Not this exact scenario, of course, but I'd learned long ago that security meant more than a gold band and whispered promises. So while he was busy with his Margaret, I'd been busy too. And now, as devastation crept across my children's faces, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The storm had finally arrived, but I had built myself a fortress. "Well," I said, reaching for the gravy boat, "I suppose that makes the second announcement of the evening much simpler. My name is Eleanor Winters. I'm 72 years old now, though on that fateful Thanksgiving, I was a much younger 67. Not that age matters much when your husband announces he's leaving you for another woman in front of your entire family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was born in a small town called Millfield, where everyone knew everyone else's business before they knew it themselves. My parents ran the local hardware store, and from a young age, I learned the value of $1, the importance of planning ahead, and the satisfaction of building something with your own 2 hands. Those lessons would serve me well, even if I wouldn't realize how well until decades later. I met Harold during my 2nd year of college. He was studying business administration and had the kind of confidence that filled a room before he even stepped into it. Tall, with warm brown eyes, and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the world worth talking to. Back then, that smile seemed genuine. Now I wonder if it was just another tool in his arsenal, carefully deployed to get what he wanted. We married young, too young looking back. I was 22, Harold 24. It was 1974, and I had dreams of finishing my degree in accounting, maybe even opening my own firm someday. But Harold had other ideas. "A man needs to provide for his family," he'd say, "and a woman needs to make that house a home." So I set aside my textbooks and calculator, convincing myself that supporting his career was the same as having one of my own. Our first apartment was tiny, a 1-bedroom walk-up with a kitchen barely big enough for a table. I still remember the yellow curtains I sewed for the windows, how proud I was of our little space. Harold was working as a junior account manager at Reynolds & Burke, a manufacturing company that made industrial parts. Not glamorous, but steady. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. Robert came along 3 years into our marriage, and Claire followed 2 years after that. Our little apartment became too small, so we stretched ourselves thin to buy a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. Those early years were a blur of diapers and midnight feedings, of Harold working late and me trying to keep everything running smoothly at home. I told myself this was just a season, that once the children were in school, I could pick up where I'd left off with my own ambitions. But life has a way of pushing dreams further down the road. By the time both children were in school, Harold had been promoted to senior management. The company was expanding, and he was traveling more often. "This is our chance," he'd tell me. "If I make regional director, we'll be set." So I continued to put my aspirations on hold, telling myself there would be time later. The years melted away, marked by school plays and soccer games, proms and graduations. Our house filled with memories, good ones mostly. Harold missed more events than I would have liked, but he was building something for all of us. At least, that's what I believed. It was our 25th anniversary when the first crack appeared in our marriage's foundation. Harold forgot. Completely and utterly forgot. I had prepared a special dinner, bought a new dress, even arranged for the children, by then in college, to call with congratulations. But Harold walked in at 9 o'clock that evening, loosening his tie, completely oblivious to the cold meal, waiting on the table or the tears I'd tried to hide. I had a meeting that ran late, he explained, not even apologizing once he realized what day it was. These things happen, Eleanor. It's just a date. Just a date. 25 years of my life reduced to just a date. Something shifted in me that night. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting matches or ultimatums. Instead, a quiet realization settled in my heart. I had made myself small to make room for Harold's big dreams, and he hadn't even noticed the sacrifice. The next day, I opened my own bank account. Just a small one, separate from our joint accounts. I didn't tell Harold, not out of malice, but because I knew he wouldn't understand. He'd see it as a betrayal rather than self-preservation. I started with just $50, money I'd saved from trimming our grocery budget. A few months later, I saw an advertisement in the local paper. Part-time bookkeeper needed. It was for a small flower shop downtown, just 15 hours at the week. When I mentioned it to Harold, he laughed. Why would you want to do that? We don't need the money, and you've never worked in a real office. His dismissal stung, but it also strengthened my resolve. I applied for the position, using my maiden name on the application. When they called me for an interview, I told Harold I was joining a book club, and when I got the job, I maintained the fiction. 3 afternoons a week, I was supposedly discussing literature with local women, when in reality, I was balancing books and learning the ins and outs of a small business. My salary wasn't much, but every penny went into my separate account. Harold never questioned where I was going or what I was doing. In retrospect, that should have been my first clue that something wasn't right. What husband doesn't ask about? His wife's new interests, especially after decades of marriage? But I was too caught up in my small rebellion to notice his indifference. The flower shop led to another opportunity with a local accountant who needed seasonal help during tax time. I took night classes at the community college, brushing up on the accounting knowledge I'd abandoned so many years ago. Within 3 years, I had earned my certification and was working part-time at a respectable firm in town. All while Harold believed I was running various committees and attending women's groups. My private account grew steadily. I wasn't making a fortune, but I was building something that was entirely my own. Then, in 2002, something unexpected happened. One of my clients at the accounting firm, an elderly widow named Mrs. Kavanaugh, took a liking to me. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told me one day. "Smart as a whip, but playing by rules that were written to keep you in your place." Mrs. Kavanaugh had inherited her late husband's real estate business and had turned it into something much more profitable than he had ever managed. She offered me an opportunity to invest in one of her properties, a small strip mall on the edge of town. The risk seemed reasonable and the potential return significant. I took $10,000 from my secret account, nearly everything I had saved, and bought a modest stake in the property. Harold, meanwhile, had been promoted to regional director as he'd always wanted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Our household income had never been higher, but neither had his absences. Business trips, he called them. I wonder now how many of those trips included Margaret. The strip mall investment paid off better than I could have imagined. Within 5 years, the property value had doubled. Mrs. Kavanaugh, impressed with my financial acumen, invited me to invest in other ventures. By our 35th anniversary, which Harold remembered this time, though I now suspect out of guilt rather than devotion, my secret portfolio was worth nearly $500,000. I diversified carefully. Commercial real estate, a few carefully selected stocks, even a silent partnership in a local restaurant that had become quite popular. I worked with a financial advisor, a woman deliberately chosen, who respected my need for privacy. All correspondence went to a P.O. box I had rented. Our children grew up, built careers, got married. Robert became an engineer, Claire a pediatrician. They gave us grandchildren, 5 in total, each one precious to me. I was the devoted grandmother, always available for babysitting, school pickups, baking cookies, and attending recitals. Harold was the fun grandfather who appeared with expensive gifts and then disappeared back into his important work world. By our 40th anniversary, my secret fortune had grown to just over $2 million. Not a spectacular sum by some standards, but considering I had built it from $50 and a lifetime of underestimation, it felt like victory. I could have revealed it then, perhaps even used it to retire together and finally enjoy the fruits of our labors. But something held me back. Some instinct told me to keep my powder dry, as my father would have said. And then came the day I found the receipt. It was such a small thing. A jeweler's slip for a diamond bracelet purchased 3 days before Christmas. The bracelet wasn't for me. I received a cashmere sweater that year. When questioned, Harold claimed it was for his executive assistant, a standard year-end bonus. I pretended to believe him. But that night, I transferred another substantial sum into my private accounts. The next 5 years passed in a strange limbo. On the surface, we were the perfect couple. Successful husband, devoted wife, beautiful, grown children, and adorable grandchildren. We hosted dinner parties where Harold told the same tired jokes to the same admiring audience. We attended charity galas where I wore elegant but conservative dresses, while Harold networked with important contacts. We visited our children on holidays and birthdays, presenting a united front while growing further apart. Meanwhile, my secret grew along with my fortune. I hired a private investigator, discreetly, through my financial advisor. The report confirmed what I had already suspected. Harold had been having an affair with Margaret Townsend, his company's marketing director, for years. The diamond bracelet had been just one of many gifts. There had been romantic getaways disguised as business trips, dinners at restaurants far enough from our social circle to avoid discovery, even a secret apartment in the city, paid for through a shell company that ultimately traced back to Harold's personal accounts. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I accelerated my financial independence plan. I bought a small but elegant condominium in my name only, furnished it simply but beautifully, and kept the keys in my private safe deposit box. I updated my will, separating my assets from our joint holdings. I researched divorce attorneys, though I didn't contact any. I was preparing for war while maintaining the most convincing peace. And throughout it all, no one, not Harold, not our children, not our friends, had any idea. I had been invisible for so long that my secrecy had become my superpower. People see what they expect to see, and everyone expected to see simple, supportive Eleanor, the woman who had sacrificed her ambitions for her family's comfort. Which brings us back to that Thanksgiving table, to Harold's announcement and the stunned faces of our family. The gravy was indeed still steaming. "Well," I said, reaching for the gravy boat, "I suppose that makes the second announcement of the evening much simpler." Harold frowned, confusion momentarily replacing his relief at having finally unburdened himself. Our children looked at me, their eyes still wet with shock. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Claire asked. I smiled, feeling calmer than I had in years. "Your father isn't the only one with secrets. I proceeded to pour gravy over my mashed potatoes as if we were discussing nothing more significant than the weather forecast. Every eye at the table was fixed on me. For the past 20 years, I continued, I've been building my own life. While your father was busy with Margaret, I was busy too. I have a career, investments, property, all in my name. And as of this morning, I am worth just over $3 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Harold's face drained of color. Robert and Claire exchanged glances of disbelief. Even the grandchildren seemed to understand that something monumental was happening. That's not possible, Harold finally stammered. You've never worked a day in your life. I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't a happy sound, but it felt good nonetheless. I've been working since Robert was in middle school. 28 years of employment that you never noticed because you never asked. 28 years of building something that belongs to me alone. But where? How? Harold's confusion was genuine, which only underscored how little attention he had paid to my life. It started at Bloom & Petal, the flower shop downtown, then Harriman Accounting during tax seasons, then Westfield and Associates. For the past 15 years, I've been a full partner at Lancaster Financial Services. My clients know me as Eleanor Jenkins, my maiden name. Our daughter Claire found her voice. Mom, why didn't you ever tell us? I looked at my beautiful daughter, so accomplished in her own right, and felt a pang of regret. At first, it was just a small rebellion, something that was mine alone. Then it became a safety net, and eventually, it became clear that I would need it. Need it for what? Robert asked, though I think he already knew the answer. For exactly this moment, I replied, turning back to Harold. You've made your choice, and now I've made mine. I'm not fighting for you. I'm not begging you to reconsider. You're free to go to Margaret with my blessing, but you're going with exactly what you've put into this marriage recently, which is nothing. Harold's face flushed with anger. That's ridiculous. Half of everything we have is mine by law. The house, the accounts, everything. I nodded, conceding the point. You're right about our joint assets. They'll be divided equitably, I'm sure. But my personal fortune isn't part of that equation. It's protected by trusts, corporations, and legal structures that would take you years and a fortune in legal fees to even begin to challenge. Our son-in-law, Michael, who had been silent until now, gave a low whistle of admiration. As a corporate attorney, he recognized the implications immediately. You can't do this, Harold insisted, his voice rising. It's fraud. It's perfectly legal, I interrupted calmly. I've paid taxes on every penny. I've maintained separate finances legally and transparently. The only fraud at this table is the man who's been living a double life for 12 years while enjoying the comforts of a wife who managed his home, raised his children, and hosted his business dinners. The grandchildren were wide-eyed now, witnessing family history unfold in real time. Our eldest granddaughter, 16-year-old Lily, was watching me with something that looked like newfound respect. Harold pushed back from the table, his Thanksgiving dinner untouched. We'll see what my lawyer has to say about this, he threatened. I'm sure we will, I agreed pleasantly. Now, who would like more turkey? It seems a shame to let it go to waste. What followed was the strangest family meal I've ever experienced. Harold left in a fury, taking his overnight bag, already packed, I noted, and slamming the door behind him. The rest of us sat in awkward silence until our grandson Jack, only 7 at the time, asked innocently, "Does this mean we get 2 Christmases now?" The tension broke, and suddenly everyone was talking at once. Questions about my secret, career, my investments, my plans. Concerns about the family's future, about how we would navigate holidays and celebrations, expressions of anger toward Harold and sympathy for me. Through it all, I maintained my composure, answering honestly but without malice. Yes, I had suspected the affair for years. No, I didn't hate Harold. I had simply outgrown my dependence on him. Yes, I would be fine financially. No, I didn't expect them to choose between us. They could love their father while disapproving of his choices. When dinner was finally over and the dishes cleared, my children insisted on helping me clear up, something they hadn't done since they were teenagers living at home. "Mom," Claire said as she dried a serving platter, "I still don't understand. Why you kept all this secret from us? Didn't you trust us?" I considered her question carefully. It wasn't about trust. It was about identity. For most of my adult life, I was Harold's wife, your mother, the grandmother to your children. Those roles defined me to the world and even to myself. This, my work, my achievements, was the first thing that was truly mine. I needed to protect it until I was ready to share it. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and I was alone in the house that had witnessed 45 years of marriage, I poured myself a glass of wine and called a locksmith to change the locks. Then I called a moving company to schedule the transfer of my personal belongings to my condominium. Finally, I called my attorney to set the divorce proceedings in motion. As I sat in my kitchen, soon to be my former kitchen, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected: freedom. Not just financial freedom, but the liberation of finally being seen for who I truly was, not who others expected me to be. The weeks that followed were chaotic, as divorce proceedings always are. Harold fought tooth and nail for a portion of my personal assets, claiming that our long marriage entitled him to everything I had built. His attorney argued that I had acted in bad faith by concealing my earnings and investments. My attorney, a formidable woman in her 50s who specialized in high-asset divorces, countered that Harold's own deception had necessitated my independent financial planning. More crucially, she demonstrated that I had meticulously separated my earnings and investments from our marital assets, using only money I had earned independently to build my portfolio. The judge, a stern woman with 3 decades on the bench, sided largely with me. Harold received his fair share of our joint assets: the house, which I no longer wanted, half of our retirement accounts, and various investments we had made together. But my personal fortune remained untouched, protected by the careful legal structures I had established. Margaret, it turned out, had her own surprise in store for Harold. Once it became clear that he wouldn't be bringing a multi-million-dollar settlement into their new life together, her ardor cooled considerably. Within 6 months of leaving me, Harold was living alone in a rented apartment, Margaret having decided that perhaps their timing wasn't right after all. As for me, I settled into my condominium and embraced my new public identity. No longer Eleanor Winters, supportive wife, but Eleanor Jenkins, financial advisor and independent woman. I expanded my client list, focusing particularly on women in situations similar to what mine had been: capable, intelligent women whose financial literacy had been stunted by traditional expectations. My relationship with my children deepened in unexpected ways. Initially shocked by the revelations about both their parents, they eventually came to see the situation with remarkable maturity. Robert confessed that he had always worried about how I would manage if something happened to Harold. "I should have known you'd have a plan," he said, hugging me. Claire, ever the more emotional of the two, needed more time to process everything. "I feel like I never really knew either of you," she admitted during a tearful conversation. But eventually, she too came to appreciate the resilience I had demonstrated. "You're teaching my daughters that a woman's worth isn't defined by her marriage," she told me. "That's a gift I never expected." Harold and I remained distantly civil for the sake of family gatherings. He never apologized for the affair, though. He did eventually express grudging admiration for how I had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. "You always were smarter than I gave you credit for," he acknowledged at Robert's 40th birthday celebration 3 years after our divorce. Yes, I agreed simply. I was. Today, 5 years after that fateful Thanksgiving, my life bears little resemblance to what it once was. I've scaled back my work to part-time, allowing me to travel, something Harold always claimed we would do someday, but never prioritized. I've visited Paris, Rome, Tokyo, and Sydney. Next month, I'm taking my eldest granddaughter Lily on a tour of college campuses, something I wish someone had done for me when I was her age. I've discovered new passions, photography, ballroom dancing, even a writing group where I'm working on a memoir tentatively titled The Invisible Fortune. I've made new friends, real friends, not just the spouses of Harold's business associates, who know me as I truly am. Harold, I hear, is dating again, though not seriously. He retired last year, earlier than planned. The company downsized, and his position was eliminated, a common fate for men his age in corporate America. I feel a twinge of sympathy when I think of him rattling around his apartment alone, his grand plans with Margaret evaporated like morning dew. But mostly, I feel grateful. Grateful for the early warning signs that pushed me to build my own security. Grateful for the women who helped me along the way. Mrs. Kavanaugh, my financial advisor, my attorney. Grateful even for the pain of betrayal, which ultimately set me free. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I wonder what would have happened if Harold had never met Margaret, if he had remained faithful, if we had grown old together as I once expected we would. Would I have ever revealed my secret fortune? Would I have continued to live as the supportive wife while silently building my empire? I'll never know the answer to those questions. But I do know this. The woman I am today, independent, confident, fully herself, could never go back to being the woman I was before. Some transformations, once complete, can never be undone. And for that, perhaps, I owe Harold and Margaret a debt of gratitude after all. The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in Harold's head as he tried to process what I had just revealed. For a man who prided himself on being in control, this unexpected shift in power was clearly unbearable. His face cycled through an impressive range of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, the beginning stages of panic. "You're bluffing," he finally said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "There's no way you have that kind of money." I took a sip of water, allowing myself a moment to savor this rare instance of having Harold at a disadvantage. 45. Years of marriage, and he had never once considered that I might have ambitions beyond keeping his home and raising his children. "I assure you, I'm not bluffing," I replied, reaching into my handbag and extracting a folder I had prepared just in case this moment ever came. I hadn't known it would be today, at our family Thanksgiving dinner no less, but I had always suspected that someday Harold's double life would collide with our marriage. I slid the folder across the table. Inside were statements from investment, accounts, property deeds, partnership agreements, and a summary sheet prepared by my financial advisor showing my net worth. $4 million to be exact. Harold grabbed the folder, flipping through the documents with increasing agitation. Our son Robert and daughter Claire exchanged glances, clearly unsure whether to be impressed by my financial acumen or concerned about what this meant for our family. "You've been hiding all this?" Harold demanded, a flash of something that looked strangely like hurt crossing his features. "For how long?" 20 years, I answered calmly. "Since our 25th anniversary." "Do you remember that day, Harold?" He looked confused, and I wasn't surprised. The day that had been a turning point for me had likely been just another forgettable Thursday to him. "You forgot our anniversary," I reminded him. "I made your favorite meal, bought a new dress, arranged for the children to call, and you came home at 9 o'clock, saying it was just a date." That was the day I realized I needed to create security for myself. Our youngest granddaughter, Emma, only 7 years old, tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Is Grandma rich?" she stage whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Claire hushed her, but I smiled at Emma. "Grandma has been very careful with her money, sweetheart. And yes, I suppose that does make me rich in some ways." "Can you buy me a pony?" Emma asked without missing a beat, and a surprised laugh escaped me, breaking some of the tension in the room. "That's enough, Emma," Claire admonished gently, but I could see she was grateful for the momentary lightening of the atmosphere. Harold was still staring at the financial statements, his brow furrowed. "These can't be real," he insisted. Though his voice lacked conviction. "Where would you even get the capital to make these investments?" "I got a job," I said simply. "Several jobs, actually, over the years. I started small, bookkeeping at a local flower shop, then tax preparation. Eventually, I became a licensed financial advisor. My clients know me as Eleanor Jenkins." "Jenkins?" Harold repeated. "Your maiden name?" I nodded. It seemed appropriate. "And you never thought to tell me any of this?" The irony of Harold, who had just confessed to a 12-year affair, questioning my honesty, was not lost on anyone at the table. "You never asked," I replied, and I saw my daughter Claire wince at the quiet devastation in those 3 simple words. "You never once asked about my day, my interests, my ambitions. You were so caught up in your own life, and apparently, in Margaret's, that you never noticed I was building one of my own." At the mention of Margaret's name, Harold's expression hardened. "This isn't about Margaret. This is about you lying to me for decades." I had expected this, the attempt to shift blame, to reframe my independence as a betrayal equivalent to his infidelity. I wouldn't allow it. "Let's be very clear, Harold," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling through me. "What I did was create financial security for myself while remaining a devoted wife, mother, and grandmother. What you did was betray our marriage vows and family trust. These are not equivalent actions." Our son-in-law, Michael, always the peacemaker, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a step back here. This is a lot for everyone to process." Robert, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "Dad, you can't seriously be comparing Mom's financial independence to your affair." Harold turned to our son, seemingly surprised to find himself without an ally. "You don't understand the complexities of marriage, Robert. Your mother and I had been growing apart for years," I finished for him. "That much is true. But there are ways to address that which don't involve deception and betrayal." Claire, ever the practical one, looked at her watch and then at her children. "I think the younger ones should probably head to the family room while the adults talk," she suggested. I was grateful for her intervention. My grandchildren didn't need to witness this painful unraveling of their grandparents' marriage. As the 3 youngest were shepherded out by Claire's teenage daughter, Lily, I couldn't help but notice how Lily looked back at me, not with confusion or disappointment, but with what appeared to be newfound respect. Once the children were out of earshot, Harold pushed away from the table, the legs of his chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. "I need some air," he announced, and stormed out of the dining room toward the back patio. The moment the door closed behind him, Claire and Robert turned to me, their expressions a mix of concern and bewilderment. "Mom," Claire began cautiously, "I'm trying to understand. All these years you've been working, building this fortune, and you never told any of us?" I looked at my beautiful daughter, so accomplished in her own field of pediatric medicine, and felt a pang of regret for the secrets I had kept even from my children. "At first, it was just about having something that was mine," I explained. "Your father's career always took precedence. Our family's needs always came first. I don't regret that. Raising you and Robert was the greatest joy of my life. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. That job at the flower shop was the first step in finding Eleanor again, not just Mrs. Harold Winters, Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my heart twist. But why keep it secret? Why not just tell Dad you wanted to work? I smiled sadly. I did once, when that bookkeeping position opened up. He laughed and said we didn't need the money, and I'd never worked in a real office. After that, I don't know. It became easier to create a separate life than to fight for space in the one we shared. And the money? Claire asked. How did you manage to build so much? Carefully, I replied. I lived through the recession of the early 80s. I saw what happened to women my mother's age who had devoted their lives to their husbands, only to be left with nothing when those marriages ended. I promised myself I wouldn't be vulnerable like that. I didn't mention my suspicions about Harold's fidelity, which had begun long before I found concrete evidence. Some truths didn't need to be spoken aloud, especially not now. Mrs. Kavanaugh, do you remember her, Robert? The widow who lived on Maple Street? She took me under her wing, taught me about real estate investment. I started small, reinvested the profits, diversified as I learned more. The compound interest of 2 decades is quite remarkable. Michael, who had been listening quietly, nodded with professional appreciation. It's impressive, Eleanor. Truly. Claire reached across the table and took my hand. I just wish you had felt you could share this part of your life with us. I wanted to, I admitted. Many times, but it became more complicated the longer. I waited. And then, I hesitated, not wanting to speak ill of Harold to his children, despite everything. And then you started to suspect Dad was having an affair. Robert finished for me, his insight catching me off guard. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How long have you known? Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Suspected? Years. Known for certain? About 3 years. I found receipts for gifts I never received, noticed discrepancies in our joint accounts, overheard phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. The usual signs, I suppose. And you stayed? Robert sounded incredulous. With your own money, your own career, why didn't you leave? It was a fair question, one I had asked myself countless times over the years. Partly habit, I acknowledged. Partly hope that things might change. And partly because I wasn't ready. I needed to be absolutely certain about my legal standing, about my financial security. Divorce after decades of marriage is complicated, especially with significant assets involved. The patio door opened, and Harold stepped back into the dining room. His face was composed now, the businessman's mask firmly back in place. I've called Margaret, he announced without preamble. I'll be staying with her tonight. We can discuss the logistics of separation later this week. Just like that, 45 years of marriage dismissed like an inconvenient business meeting. I should have been hurt. Perhaps I would be later. But in that moment, all I felt was a profound sense of relief that the pretense was finally over. That seems reasonable, I agreed, matching his businesslike tone. I'll have my attorney contact yours on Monday. Harold's eyes narrowed at the mention of my attorney. You already have a divorce attorney? I've had one on retainer for 3 years, Harold. I believe in being prepared. This revelation seemed to unsettle him more than anything else I had said. The idea that I had been planning for this eventuality, that I had been steps ahead of him, clearly disturbed his view of our relationship, and perhaps his view of me. I'll get my things, he muttered, heading toward our bedroom. Claire started to rise, perhaps to follow her father, but I gently touched her arm. Give him space. This isn't easy for any of us. While Harold packed, an uncomfortable silence settled over the dining room. The turkey had grown cold, the gravy congealed in its boat. Our perfect Thanksgiving dinner, like our perfect marriage, was revealed to be nothing more than an elaborate facade. What happens now? Robert finally asked, breaking the stillness. Now, I said, drawing a deep breath, we adjust to a new normal. Your father and I will work out the details of our separation. But nothing changes between you and him or between you and me. We're still your parents. We still love you and your families more than anything in the world. It won't be that simple, Claire objected, tears welling in her eyes. Holidays, birthdays, family gatherings, everything will be different. I reached for her hand again. Different doesn't have to mean worse, sweetheart. Sometimes different just means more honest. Harold emerged from the bedroom with a suitcase and his laptop bag. He had changed out of his Thanksgiving sweater into one of his business suits, as if preparing for battle. I'll call you tomorrow, he said, addressing the children rather than me. We can talk more then when things are calmer. Robert stood, his posture stiff. I'll walk you out, Dad. I couldn't hear what was said at the front door, but when Robert returned, his expression was troubled. He wanted to make sure. I knew that he didn't mean for it to happen like this, that he had planned to tell us after the holidays, but the moment just felt right. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. The moment felt right to blow up our family during Thanksgiving dinner? That's convenient. Claire shot me a look of mild reproach. Mom, please, this is hard enough. She was right, of course. No matter how justified my anger, expressing it wouldn't help my children navigate this painful situation. I took a deep breath and nodded. You're right. I'm sorry. I stood and began clearing the table, needing something productive to do with my hands. Why don't we salvage what we can of this evening? The kids must be hungry, and there's pie for dessert. Michael and Robert exchanged glances, clearly surprised by my composure. But Claire, who had always understood me best, simply started helping, me with the dishes. You've been preparing for this for a long time, haven't you? She asked quietly as we worked side by side in the kitchen. In some ways, yes, I admitted. But you never can fully prepare for the end of a marriage, no matter how inevitable it seems. Are you okay, Mom? Really? I paused, considering her question seriously. I will be, I finally said. I've built a good life for myself, one that doesn't depend on your father's presence or approval. That's more than many women my age can say. Claire nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer, and we finished putting together dessert plates for the children. The remainder of the evening passed in a strange, subdued fashion. We ate pumpkin pie and played board games with the grandchildren, all of us working hard to project normalcy despite the seismic shift that had occurred at the dinner table. By the time everyone was ready to leave, a tentative new equilibrium had been established. As I hugged each family member goodbye at the door, I whispered reassurances and promises to call soon. Lily, my eldest granddaughter, held on a bit longer than usual. Grandma, she whispered, I think what you did was badass. Despite everything, I found myself smiling. Language, young lady. She grinned, unrepentant. Still true. After everyone had gone, I wandered through the house that had been my home for over 4 decades. It felt both intimately familiar and suddenly strange, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the shock of the evening's revelations. In the master bathroom, Harold's toiletries were missing from the counter. He had taken his electric razor, his cologne, his monogrammed towel, such small things to mark the end of nearly half a century together. I sat on the edge of the bed, our bed, and finally allowed myself to feel the emotions I had been carefully controlling all evening. Not grief for the loss of Harold. That grief had been processed in small doses over years of growing suspicion and distance. Not anger, though there was certainly justification for it. What overwhelmed me in that moment was a profound sense of validation. For years, I had questioned my instincts, doubted my perceptions, convinced myself that my uneasiness about Harold's behavior was merely paranoia or insecurity. Tonight had confirmed what part of me had always known. I had been right to protect myself, right to build my own security, right to prepare for this day. I moved to my closet and pushed aside my winter coats to reveal a small safe installed in the back wall, hidden behind a false panel. Harold had never known it existed, just as he had never known about my separate bank accounts or investment portfolio. I entered the combination and removed a small leather portfolio containing documents I had gathered over the years. Copies of Harold's credit card statements showing purchases for Margaret, phone records highlighting calls to her number, even photographs taken by the private investigator showing them together at a resort when Harold was supposedly at a business conference. I had never planned to use these materials vindictively, but I had collected them methodically, understanding that divorce proceedings could turn ugly, especially when significant assets were involved. Harold's decision to announce his affair publicly might simplify matters. At least there would be no need to prove infidelity. But experience had taught me to remain prepared for all possibilities. Next to the portfolio was a set of keys to my secret sanctuary. A waterfront condominium I had purchased 3 years ago when I first obtained concrete evidence of Harold's affair. Decorated in shades of blue and cream with large windows overlooking the bay. It was everything our marital home was not. Modern, serene, and wholly mine. I had furnished it slowly, carefully, telling no one of its existence. It was my escape plan, my insurance policy, my promise to myself that I would never be trapped or dependent again. I returned the portfolio to the safe but kept the keys out. Tonight, I would sleep in my own bed, in my own home. But tomorrow, I would begin the process of moving my life to a space untainted by deception and compromise. As I prepared for bed, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The woman who looked back at me was not the devastated wife I might have been without my secret career and financial independence. She looked tired, certainly, and perhaps a little sad, but also resolute. Dignified. I nodded at my reflection, acknowledging this woman who had quietly built her own wings while her husband was busy constructing his elaborate lies. Sleep came surprisingly easily that night. Perhaps because, for the first time in years, I had nothing left to hide. The next morning brought a flurry of text messages and calls from concerned family members. I reassured them all that I was fine, that I had expected this day would come eventually, that I was fully prepared to move forward with my life. Robert insisted on coming over with coffee and bagels, a transparent excuse to check on me in person. "You don't need to worry," I told him as we sat at the kitchen table. "I'm not going to fall apart." He studied me over the rim of his coffee cup. "It's not that I think you'll fall apart, Mom. It's just, this is a lot. And you're being so calm about it all. Because I've had years to prepare myself," I explained. "Your father's announcement wasn't a shock to me, just a confirmation of what I already knew. And this secret career of yours? The money? Were you ever going to tell us about that? If Dad hadn't forced your hand?" It was a fair question, one that deserved an honest answer. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wanted to. There were moments, when you got your promotion at the engineering firm, when Claire opened her pediatric practice, when I almost told you both how I understood your professional pride, because I felt it too. But it never seemed like the right time. Because of Dad? Partly, I acknowledged, but also because I was afraid you might not understand, that you might see it as some sort of betrayal of our family, as if my desire for independence somehow diminished my love for all of you. Robert reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We wouldn't have thought that, Mom. We would have been proud of you. We are proud of you." His words touched me deeply. "Thank you for that. It means more than you know." We spent the morning going through practical matters, which accounts were joint, which solely in my name or Harold's, what the process of separation would entail. Robert, with his engineer's mindset, approached it all as a problem to be solved methodically, which was exactly what I needed. By afternoon, I felt ready to make my first major move. I called the attorney I had on retainer, Catherine Bloom, a formidable divorce lawyer known for her thorough approach and uncompromising advocacy. "So he finally did it," she said when I explained the situation. "I'm sorry, Eleanor, even though we've been preparing for this possibility." "Thank you. Catherine, I'd like to proceed as we discussed. Priority 1 is protecting my separate assets. Of course, I'll file the initial paperwork on Monday. In the meantime, I'd suggest moving any personal items of significant value, financial or sentimental, to a secure location. Divorces can bring out the worst in people, even after decades of marriage." "Already handled," I assured her, thinking of the safety deposit boxes where I had gradually transferred my grandmother's jewelry, important documents, and irreplaceable family photographs. "Good. And Eleanor? Try to document any communication with Harold. If he calls, follow up with an email summarizing what was discussed. If he texts or emails, save everything. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, but judges have considerable discretion in determining what's equitable, especially in long-term marriages." I thanked her and promised to be diligent. As I hung up, I noticed a text message from Claire. "Dad just called. He wants to meet with all of us tomorrow at his office. Says he wants to explain his side. Are you okay with this?" I considered the request. Part of me wanted to refuse, to declare that Harold had forfeited any right to family mediation when he chose to blindside us all at Thanksgiving dinner. But that would only put my children in an impossible position, forced to choose between their parents. "That's fine," I texted back. "What time?" Claire's response came quickly. 2 p.m. Robert and I will both be there. Michael is staying with the kids. "I'll see you then," I replied, keeping my message neutral despite the apprehension building within me. What exactly did Harold think he needed to explain? What side could possibly justify 12 years of deception? To distract myself from these unproductive thoughts, I decided it was time to visit my condominium. As I drove along the shoreline, watching the winter sun glint off the gray waters of the bay, I felt a sense of anticipation building. This place represented not just an escape from a failing marriage, but an affirmation of my own agency and foresight. The building's security guard recognized me immediately. "Good afternoon, Ms. Jenkins," he greeted me, using the name I had given when purchasing the property. "Haven't seen you in a while." "I've been busy, Frank," I replied with a smile. "But I'll be around more often now." "Looking forward to it, ma'am." The elevator carried me to the 14th floor, and I unlocked the door to Unit 1407 with a feeling approaching reverence. Stepping inside, I was greeted by the clean, open space I had created for myself, so different from the traditional colonial home where Harold and I had raised our family. Here, floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the water view. Sleek, modern, furniture in cool blues and grays replaced the antiques and heirlooms that filled our marital home. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances, many of which I had never used. This had been a place of occasional refuge, a secret sanctuary I visited when the weight of pretense became too heavy to bear. Now, it would become my home. I moved through the rooms slowly, reacquainting myself with the space, mentally arranging which of my belongings would come here and which would remain with the house. The bedroom was Spartan but elegant, with a platform bed facing the window so that the first thing I would see each morning would be the sun rising over the water. The guest room was ready for visiting family, a hope that had seemed impossible when I first purchased the condo, but now felt within reach. In the study, a small desk held a computer and files related to my financial advising practice. Here was where I had built my career, advised clients, managed investments that had outperformed even my optimistic projections. I ran my fingers along the spines of finance books on the shelves, remembering how each one had expanded my knowledge, empowered me to take greater control of my future. I sat at the desk and opened the bottom drawer, removing a leather-bound journal I had kept for years. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense. I had never been one to record daily activities or emotions. Instead, it contained observations, insights, plans for the future. On the first page, dated exactly 20 years earlier, was a simple declaration. Today I begin. Leafing through the pages, I traced my journey from financial novice to confident investor, from part-time bookkeeper to respected advisor. Between the lines, I could read the parallel story of my marriage's slow dissolution, not in explicit references to Harold's behavior, but in the growing certainty of my entries, the shift from contingency planning to active preparation for an independent life. The last entry was from 2 weeks earlier. The transfer to Coastal Trust is complete. All assets now protected under the terms we established. Ready for whatever comes next. I closed the journal and returned it to its drawer. Tomorrow would bring the inevitable confrontation with Harold, the beginning of legal proceedings, the complicated process of untangling two lives that had been intertwined for nearly half a century. But tonight, in this space that represented my foresight and resilience, I would allow myself to acknowledge a difficult truth. Alongside the pain of betrayal and the end of my marriage, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The phone on my desk rang, startling me from my reflections. The caller ID showed Claire's number. "Mom, where are you? I stopped by the house, but you're not there." I hesitated for just a moment before deciding that the time for secrets was... I'm at my condominium, Claire, on Miller's Point. A pause, then, "You have a condo? Since when?" 3 years. "Would you like to come see it? I can text you the address." Another pause, longer this time. "Yes," she finally said. "I think I would." An hour later, Claire stood in my condominium's living room, taking in the panoramic view of the bay. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the water, painting the waves in shades of gold and amber. She had been silent since arriving, moving from room to room with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "It's beautiful," she finally said, turning to face me. "Modern, not your usual style at all." I smiled, acknowledging the truth in her observation. That was deliberate. I wanted something completely different, a space that was just mine, that didn't carry any echoes of the life I shared with your father. Claire ran her fingers along the back of the sleek gray sofa. "How often did you come here?" "Once or twice a month, usually when your father was traveling. I'd tell him I was visiting a friend or attending a book club meeting." "And he never questioned it? Never wanted to meet these supposed friends?" The hint of judgment in her voice stung, but I understood it. Claire had always idolized her father, perhaps because his occasional presence in her life made his attention seem more valuable. His career-focused absences had been reframed in her mind as necessary sacrifices rather than choices. "No," I answered. "Honestly, he never asked." Claire sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. "I keep trying to reconcile the father I thought I knew with a man who could have a 12-year affair. Who could announce it at Thanksgiving dinner, of all places? And now I'm trying to reconcile the mother I thought I knew with." She gestured around the room. "All of this. A secret life. A secret fortune." I sat beside her, close, but not touching, respecting the space she needed to process everything. "I understand. It's a lot to take in. I never wanted to deceive you or Robert, but the longer I maintained my separate life, the harder it became to find the right moment to reveal it." "Were you ever going to tell us?" Her question echoed Robert's from earlier that day. "I think I would have eventually," I said after a moment's consideration. "Perhaps when your father and I finally separated, which I knew was inevitable. Or perhaps when I retired completely and no longer needed to maintain the professional identity I'd built." Claire looked at me directly, her eyes, so like Harold's, searching my face. Did you ever love Dad? Or was that part of the deception too? The question hit me like a physical blow. Of course I loved him, I replied, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. I loved him deeply, Claire. For many years, he was the center of my world. We built a life together, raised 2 wonderful children. That wasn't pretense. Then when did it change? When did you start? She trailed off, gesturing vaguely. Pulling away? I suggested. Planning for a life without him? It wasn't one moment, sweetheart. It was a gradual realization that your father and I had become fundamentally different people with different priorities. I noticed the signs of his distraction, his emotional withdrawal, long before I had concrete evidence of his affair. And instead of confronting him, you just built all this? She wasn't accusatory, merely trying to understand. I made a choice, I explained. I could have confronted him, demanded answers, perhaps even saved our marriage, though I doubt that was possible by the time I began to suspect Margaret. Or I could protect myself, create options, ensure that whatever happened, I wouldn't be left vulnerable. I chose the latter. Claire was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. I think I understand, she finally said. I'm not sure I would have made the same choice, but I understand it. It was all I could ask for. Thank you. She glanced at her watch and sighed. I should get back to the kids. Michael has been handling them alone all day, and Emma has been asking questions about what happened with Grandpa. What will you tell her? I asked, curious about how my daughter would explain the situation to a 7-year-old. The truth, in simple terms, that sometimes grown-ups decide they don't want to be married anymore, and that it's not her fault or anything she needs to worry about. Claire stood, straightening her sweater. Will you be staying here tonight? I think so, yes. I need some time to think, to plan my next steps. Claire nodded, and I could see her organizing her thoughts, her practical nature asserting itself. Do you need help moving your things from the house? Not yet, I assured her. I have enough here. For now. I'll arrange for the rest later. As we walked to the door, Claire surprised me by pulling me into a tight hug. I'm still processing everything, Mom, she whispered against my shoulder. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, whatever happens next. I held her close, feeling the weight of decades of secrecy lifting slightly. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than I can say. After Claire left, I wandered through the condominium again, this time with new eyes. This was no longer just a sanctuary or an insurance policy. It was my future, the setting for the next chapter of my life. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. I prepared a simple dinner and ate at the small table by the window, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the bay became a vast, dark expanse dotted with the lights of distant boats. For the first time in years, I didn't need to consider anyone else's preferences or schedule. I could eat when I was hungry, sleep when I was tired, read without interruption. It should have felt lonely, this first night of my new life. Instead, it felt like taking a deep breath after decades of holding it. The next day dawned clear and cold, sunlight glinting off the water and illuminating the sprinkling of snow that had fallen overnight. I stood at the window with my coffee, mentally preparing for the meeting with Harold at 2 p.m. Whatever his explanation entailed, I needed to remain composed, focused on the practical matters of our separation rather than the emotional wounds of his betrayal. I dressed with care, choosing a tailored navy suit I had purchased for client meetings, paired with a silk blouse in a subtle shade of blue. Professional but not severe, confident but not confrontational. My appearance had always been something of a negotiation between Harold's preferences. He liked me in softer colors, more feminine styles, and my own taste. Today, I dressed entirely for myself. The drive to Harold's office took me through familiar streets that suddenly seemed different, as if the revelation of his affair had somehow altered the very landscape of our shared life. His company occupied 3 floors of a modern glass building downtown, with his corner office offering views of both the city skyline and the harbor beyond. Claire and Robert were already waiting in the lobby when I arrived. Claire looked tense, her posture rigid as she checked her watch repeatedly. Robert paced near the reception desk, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Mom," Robert said, relief evident in his voice. "You're here." "Of course," I replied, giving each of them a quick hug. "Have you seen your father yet?" Claire shook her head. "His assistant said he's wrapping up a call and will be ready for us in a few minutes." We sat in the waiting area, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us. I could sense my children's nervousness, their uncertainty about what this meeting would entail. For their sake, I maintained an outward calm, though inwardly I was steeling myself for whatever tactics Harold might employ. "Mrs. Winters?" Harold's assistant approached, her smile professional but her eyes curious. No doubt the office was already abuzz with gossip about Harold's Thanksgiving announcement. "Mr. Winters will see you now." She led us to Harold's office, knocking once before opening the door. "Your family is here, sir." Harold stood behind his imposing desk, dressed in one of his best suits, his silver hair perfectly styled. Even now, after everything, I couldn't deny he cut an impressive figure. For a fleeting moment, I saw him as he had been when we first met. Young, ambitious, full of plans for the future we would build together. The contrast with the man before me now, who had systematically deceived his family for over a decade, made my heart ache for what might have been. "Eleanor, Robert, Claire," he greeted us, gesturing toward the seating area near the window. "Thank you for coming." We arranged ourselves on the leather sofas, Claire and Robert on one, Harold on the other, me in an armchair between them, as if physically embodying the new family dynamic. Harold cleared his throat. "I want to start by saying how deeply I regret the way things unfolded yesterday. It was never my intention to hurt any of you or to create such a dramatic scene." "What exactly was your intention, Dad?" Robert asked, his voice carefully controlled. "To keep living your double life indefinitely?" Harold winced. "No, of course not. Margaret and I had discussed making our relationship public after the holidays. We thought it would be less disruptive that way." "Less disruptive," Claire repeated flatly. "Because finding out our father has been having an affair for 12 years would be so much easier to process after Christmas." I remained silent, observing this exchange between father and children, noting how Harold's confident facade cracked slightly under their direct questioning. "I understand your anger," Harold said, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "I made a terrible mistake in how I handled this situation, but I want you both to know that my relationship with Margaret doesn't change how much I love you or how proud I am of the adults you've become." Claire's expression softened slightly at this, but Robert remained unmoved. "If you loved us, Dad, you wouldn't have lied to us for over a decade. You wouldn't have betrayed Mom." Harold's jaw tightened. "My relationship with your mother is complicated, Robert. It hasn't been a real marriage for many years." "By whose definition?" I finally spoke, my voice calm but firm. "Because from where I sit, I fulfilled every commitment I made to you. I raised our children, managed our home, supported your career, attended your business functions, played the role of devoted wife, even as I suspected you were building a life with someone else. And apparently built quite a life of your own." "In secret," Harold countered, a flash of anger breaking through his controlled exterior. "You can hardly claim transparency was a priority for you, Eleanor." "There's a significant difference between financial independence and infidelity, Harold, and you know it." I refused to let him equate the two, to use my private career as justification for his betrayal. Harold ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I recognized from our rare arguments. I didn't ask you here to rehash who wronged whom. We need to discuss practical matters. The house, our joint accounts, how we'll handle family gatherings moving forward. You're right, I agreed, steering the conversation back to logistics rather than emotions. Let's focus on that. For the next hour, we outlined the initial steps of our separation. Harold had already spoken with his attorney and proposed that we each maintain our personal accounts while freezing withdrawals from joint ones until a formal agreement could be reached. He suggested I remain in the house temporarily while he stayed with Margaret, a proposal that nearly brought a sardonic smile to my face. He had no idea I had my own place, was assuming I would need his generosity to avoid homelessness. That won't be necessary, I informed him. I have my own living arrangements. Harold looked genuinely surprised. Since when? That's not relevant to our current discussion, I replied smoothly. What matters is that I don't need to remain in the house if you wish to return to it. I don't, he said quickly. Margaret's place is more convenient for work. I'm sure it is, I thought, remembering that Margaret's luxury apartment was just 2 blocks from his office, a fact I had learned from the private investigator's report. We agreed on a date to meet with our respective attorneys, discussed how to handle upcoming family events. Robert's youngest son had a school play the following week, and established some basic boundaries for this transition period. Throughout the discussion, Harold maintained his businesslike demeanor, treating our separation like a corporate restructuring rather than the dismantling of a 4-decade marriage. As we prepared to leave, Harold asked to speak with me privately. Claire and Robert exchanged glances but agreed to wait in the lobby. When the door closed behind them, Harold's professional mask slipped, revealing a mix of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Eleanor, he began, his voice lower, more intimate than it had been during our formal discussion. There's something I need to ask you. I waited, maintaining the emotional distance I had cultivated over years of suspicion and disappointment. Your investments, your property, just how extensive are they? Of course. Even now, Harold's primary concern was financial. I shouldn't have been surprised, yet somehow the blatant self-interest still stung. My assets are not your concern, Harold, I replied evenly. My attorney will provide yours with all legally required disclosures during the divorce proceedings. His expression hardened. After 45 years of marriage, you owe me more than legal disclosures, Eleanor. We built a life together. Half of everything we have is rightfully mine. Half of everything we built together, I corrected him. My separate assets, earned through my own work and invested without any contribution from you, remain mine. Connecticut law is quite clear on that point. Harold's face flushed with anger. You deceived me for years, hid income, made investments without my knowledge or consent. No judge will look favorably on that level of financial misconduct. I had anticipated this argument and was prepared for it. I reported all income on our tax returns, Harold. I paid taxes on every penny I earned. The fact that you never bothered to review our joint filings, which you signed, by the way, doesn't constitute deception on my part. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Who are you? He asked, genuine bewilderment in his voice. When did you become this calculating person? The question almost made me laugh. The irony of Harold, who had systematically deceived his family for 12 years, questioning my character was too absurd. I became this person gradually, I answered truthfully. With each business trip that extended mysteriously, each late-night call you took in your study with the door closed, each receipt I found for gifts I never received. I became this person because I had to, Harold. Because you gave me no choice. He had no response to that, and after a moment of tense silence, I gathered my purse and moved toward the door. For what it's worth, Harold said as my hand touched the doorknob. I did love you, Eleanor. For many years, I loved you very much. I paused, absorbing the past tense, the finality of it. I loved you too, Harold. But love without respect, without honesty, without commitment, it's not enough. It never was. I left him standing in his corner office, surrounded by the trappings of the successful life he had built, at least in part, on lies. In the lobby, Robert and Claire stood when they saw me approach, their expressions questioning. "Everything's fine," I assured them. "Just finalizing some details." We rode the elevator down in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. When we reached the ground floor, Claire checked her watch. "I have to pick up Emma from her friend's house," she said. "Will you be okay, Mom?" "I'm perfectly fine," I assured her. "Go take care of Emma. I'll call you tomorrow." After Claire left, Robert lingered, clearly wanting to say something but unsure how to begin. "Walk with me?" I suggested, gesturing toward the small park across from Harold's building. It was cold but clear, the winter sun casting long shadows across the paths. Robert nodded, and we crossed the street together, finding an empty bench overlooking a frozen fountain. For several minutes, we sat in companionable silence, watching people hurry past in heavy coats and colorful scarves. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Robert finally said. "That summer we went to Cape Cod when I was maybe 9 or 10. Dad had promised to teach me to sail, but then he got called back to work for some emergency. You were left with 2 disappointed kids and a rental cottage for another week." I remembered that summer vividly. The small cottage with the wraparound porch, the sand that got into everything, Claire's sunburn on the second day. "Instead of cutting the vacation short," Robert continued, "you found a local sailing instructor and arranged lessons for both of us. You stretched the budget to make it happen, worked extra hard to keep us entertained. When Dad finally showed up for the last 2 days, you never once made him feel guilty for leaving." "He was building his career," I said, echoing the explanation I had given my children countless times over the years. "It was important for all of us." Robert shook his head. "That's what you always told us. But now I'm wondering how many of those emergencies, those urgent business trips, were really about work, and how many were about Margaret or someone before her." It was a question I had asked myself many times, particularly after confirming Harold's affair with Margaret. How long had his infidelity truly stretched back? Had there been others before her? "It doesn't matter now," I said, meaning it. "The past is the past. We can't change it, only learn from it." Robert studied me, his expression thoughtful. "You're not what I expected, Mom." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Anger, bitterness, tears." He gestured vaguely. "When Dad made his announcement, for a split second I thought you might fall apart right there at the dinner table. But instead, you just took control, revealed this whole other side of yourself that none of us knew existed." I smiled, touched by his concern. "I've had years to prepare for this moment, Robert. Years to process my feelings about your father's betrayal. The anger and tears happened long ago, in private." "And the bitterness?" I considered the question seriously. "There is some," I admitted. "How could there not be? But I refuse to let it define me or the next chapter of my life. I've worked too hard, built too much, to allow resentment to poison it all." Robert nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer. "So what happens now? With the divorce? With your career? Will you keep working?" "For now, yes. I enjoy my work, and my clients depend on me. As for the divorce, it will proceed as these things do. Negotiations, compromises, eventually a settlement. Your father and I are both practical people at heart. I don't anticipate the kind of acrimonious battle that some couples wage." "And the family?" Robert asked, his voice quieter now. "How do we move forward from this?" It was the question that had haunted me throughout my years of preparation. I had secured my financial future, planned for my independence, but the impact on our family dynamics, that was harder to anticipate or control. "One day at a time," I told him honestly. There will be adjustments, awkward moments, new traditions to establish, but the foundation, the love between parents and children, between siblings, between grandparents and grandchildren, that remains unchanged. Robert seemed to accept this, though concern still shadowed his eyes. We sat a while longer, watching as the park gradually emptied, the early winter darkness driving people homeward. Finally, Robert checked his watch and sighed. I should go. Sarah's expecting me for dinner. I squeezed his hand. Go. Give her and the boys my love. As he stood to leave, Robert hesitated. Where will you go now? Back to the house or to my condominium? I said, the words still unfamiliar on my tongue. Claire visited last night. Perhaps you'd like to see it sometime as well? I would, he said, smiling. Maybe this weekend? That would be lovely. After Robert left, I remained on the bench a while longer, watching as lights came on in offices and apartments across the street. Workers heading home after a long day, families gathering for dinner, lives continuing in their ordinary rhythms despite the seismic changes in my own. My phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine Bloom, my attorney. Filed initial paperwork. Today. Harold's attorney already reached out. Meeting scheduled for Thursday, 10 a.m. at my office. Be prepared for aggressive tactics, asset division. I wasn't surprised. Harold had built his career on being a step ahead of competitors, anticipating moves and countering them before they could be fully executed. He would approach our divorce with the same strategic mindset. But what he didn't yet understand was that I had been planning this chess match far longer than he had considered moves and counter-moves while he was still assuming I would remain his faithful, oblivious wife indefinitely. Another text arrived, this one from Claire. Thinking of you. Emma wants to know if you'll still come to her ballet recital next month. I told her of course you will. Hope that's okay. My heart lifted at this small evidence that despite everything, my place in my grandchildren's lives remained secure. Wouldn't miss it for the world, I texted back. Tell her Grandma is practicing her applause already. As darkness settled, fully over the park, I finally rose from the bench, my joints stiff from the cold and the weight of the day's emotional conversations. Instead of heading directly to my car, I found myself walking toward the harbor, drawn to the water as I had been since childhood. The bay stretched before me, dark and vast in the winter evening, dotted with the lights of boats and distant shorelines. I stood at the railing, breathing in the salt air, feeling the strange mix of liberation and grief that had become my constant companion since Harold's announcement. 45 years of marriage, ended over Thanksgiving dinner. A lifetime of memories, some joyous, some painful, all part of the complex tapestry that had brought me to this moment. I thought of the young woman I had been when I met Harold, so eager to build a life with the charismatic business student who promised to give me the world. I thought of the mother I became, fiercely protective of my children, even as I began to suspect their father's betrayal. And I thought of the woman I was now, financially independent, professionally accomplished, standing at the threshold of a future entirely of my own making. The cold finally drove me back toward my car. As I walked, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would let such calls go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. Eleanor Jenkins? A woman's voice asked, using my professional name. Yes, this is Eleanor. This is Diane Levinson. We met at the Coastal Women in Finance Symposium last year. I hope you don't mind my calling. Marianne Chen gave me your number. I remembered Diane, a sharp-minded investment banker in her 40s who had asked insightful questions during my panel presentation on retirement planning for professional women. Of course, Diane. What can I do for you? I heard through the grapevine that you might be taking on new clients, she said. My mother recently sold her business and is looking for someone to help her manage the proceeds. Someone who understands the unique challenges women face in preserving and growing wealth. I smiled at the timing. Even as one chapter of my life was ending, opportunities for the next were already presenting themselves. I would be happy to meet with your mother, I told her. My schedule is somewhat in flux at the moment, but perhaps next week. We arranged a tentative meeting, and I hung up feeling a renewed sense of purpose. My professional reputation, built carefully over 2 decades of dedicated work, was opening doors even as others were closing. By the time I reached my condominium, the emotional exhaustion of the day had caught up with me. I kicked off my shoes just inside the door and moved directly to the kitchen, where I poured myself a glass of the Cabernet I kept for special occasions. This day, the first full day of my new life, certainly qualified. I carried the wine to the window, gazing out at the lights reflecting on the dark water below. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Meetings with attorneys, discussions about asset divisions, continued navigation of the shifting family dynamics. But tonight, in this space I had created for myself, I allowed a moment of quiet celebration. For the strength I had found, the security I had built, the future I had secured through years of careful planning. The woman reflected in the window glass looked tired but resolute. Not broken, not defeated, but standing tall in the knowledge of her own capability and worth. I raised my glass to her, to myself, in a silent toast. To new beginnings, I whispered, and to the power of preparation. The first meeting with the attorneys was exactly as Catherine had predicted, tense, focused on financial matters, and marked by Harold's barely contained disbelief at the extent of my separate assets. We gathered in Catherine's elegantly appointed conference room, the mahogany table between us like a physical manifestation of the divide in our marriage. Harold arrived with Martin Geller, a divorce attorney known for aggressive tactics in high-asset cases. I recognized him from charity galas we had attended over the years, a sharp-featured man with calculating eyes and a reputation for leaving opposing parties with as little as legally possible. "Mrs. Winters," Martin greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope we can make this process as painless as possible for everyone involved." Catherine, never one to be intimidated, responded with professional coolness. "That's our hope as well, provided your client is prepared to negotiate in good faith." Harold sat stiffly in his chair, his gaze fixed on the folder Catherine had placed before her. I knew it contained documentation of my separate assets, accounts, and investments, the tangible evidence of my years of financial independence. "Before we begin," Martin said, "my client has instructed me to express his willingness to be generous in the division of marital assets, given the length of the marriage and Mrs. Winters' limited employment history." I bit back a smile. At this transparent attempt to establish me as the financially dependent spouse, Catherine didn't bother hiding her amusement. "How thoughtful," she replied. "However, as the documentation we're about to share demonstrates, Mrs. Winters is quite capable of supporting herself. In fact, her personal assets significantly exceed those held jointly with Mr. Winters." She slid copies of my financial disclosures across the table. I watched Harold's face as he began reviewing the materials, noting the exact moment when comprehension dawned. His eyes widened, his jaw tightened, and a flush crept up his neck. "This can't be accurate," he said, looking up from the papers. "Eleanor never earned this kind of money. Where did it come from?" "Every penny is accounted for," Catherine assured him. "As you'll see in the documentation, Mrs. Winters has been employed as a financial advisor for over 15 years, operating under her maiden name. Her investments have performed exceptionally well, particularly her real estate holdings and early-stage investments in several technology companies." Martin leaned close to Harold, whispering something that made him frown more deeply. I could guess the content. Warnings that challenging my financial disclosures would be difficult without evidence of fraud or hidden assets. "We'll need time to review these materials thoroughly," Martin finally said. And we reserve the right to request additional documentation regarding the origin of these funds. Of course, Catherine agreed pleasantly. Everything has been meticulously documented, but we're happy to provide any clarification needed. The meeting continued for another hour, focusing on procedural matters and timelines. Throughout, Harold kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, somewhere between anger and a reluctant sort of respect. When we finally adjourned, Catherine remained behind to speak with Martin about scheduling, leaving Harold and me alone in the hallway outside her office. "You've been planning this for years," he said quietly, not quite an accusation, but close. "I've been building security for myself," I corrected. "There's a difference. You never trusted me." Now there was definite hurt in his voice, which might have moved me if not for the absurdity of his complaint. "And you proved that instinct correct, didn't you?" I replied, keeping my voice level. 12 years with Margaret, Harold. 12 years of lies. He had the grace to look away, unable to meet my gaze. "It wasn't what you think." "What I think doesn't matter anymore," I told him. "What matters is moving forward with as much dignity as possible, for the sake of our children and grandchildren." Harold nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say more. But whatever it was remained unspoken as Catherine emerged from her office, signaling that our conversation was over. "I'll call you later," she told me as I prepared to leave. "There are a few points Martin raised that we should discuss." I nodded, grateful as always for her competence and discretion. As I walked toward the elevator, I was acutely aware of Harold's gaze following me. For decades, I had been his wife, his support system, the steady presence that enabled his success. Now I was a stranger to him, a woman with resources and resolve he hadn't known I possessed. The realization brought not satisfaction, but a complex mixture of sadness and vindication. There was no joy in proving Harold wrong about me, only a quiet affirmation that my instincts to protect myself had been justified. Outside, the January air was brisk, carrying the promise of snow later in the day. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward my car, my mind already moving on to the next items on my agenda. I had a client meeting at 11, followed by lunch with a former colleague who had reached out after hearing about my impending divorce. Life was continuing, reshaping itself around the new reality of my independence. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A text from Claire. "How did it go with the lawyers? Dad already called Robert, sounding upset." I smiled at my daughter's concern. "Fine," I texted back. "Professional on all sides. Your father is just processing some new information." Her response came quickly. "Want to talk about it over dinner tonight? Emma's been asking to see your special apartment ever since I mentioned it." The invitation warmed me. Despite the upheaval of recent weeks, my bond with Claire was growing stronger, more honest than it had been in years. "I'd love that," I replied. "Shall I cook, or would Emma prefer pizza?" "Pizza!" came the immediate response, making me laugh. Some things never changed. My granddaughter's enthusiasm for pizza had been a constant since she was old enough to eat solid food. I navigated through downtown traffic with a lighter heart than I'd had entering the attorney's office. Yes, the divorce proceedings would be complex and likely contentious at times, but the foundations of what truly mattered, my relationships with my children and grandchildren, remained solid. My client meeting went smoothly, focused on adjustments to her retirement portfolio in light of recent market fluctuations. Gail Forrester had been with me for nearly a decade, one of my first clients when I transitioned from tax preparation to financial advising. She had recently sold her successful catering business and was navigating the unfamiliar waters of retirement. "The freedom is wonderful," she confided as we finished reviewing her statements. "But I keep having this dream that I've forgotten to order supplies for a major event. I wake up in a panic before remembering I don't have to worry about that anymore." I smiled in recognition. The transition takes time. Your business was your identity for so long. Exactly, Gail agreed. Speaking of transitions, I heard through the grapevine that you're going through one yourself. Is it true? You and Harold are separating? News traveled fast in our social circle, despite my efforts to keep personal matters private. Yes, I confirmed. We're in the early stages of divorce proceedings. Gail's expression softened with sympathy. I'm sorry, Eleanor. After so many years together. It must be difficult. It is, I acknowledged, but also necessary. Sometimes, endings, however painful, make way for better beginnings. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Gail had divorced her first husband decades earlier, long before I knew her. If you ever need to talk, not as client and advisor, but just as friends, I'm here. I thanked her, touched by the offer. It was a reminder that while my marriage was ending, my connections to others, professional relationships that had evolved into friendships, community ties built over years, remained intact. Lunch with my former colleague, Sophia Chen, provided another welcome perspective. We met at a small bistro near the waterfront, its large windows offering views of the harbor despite the gray January day. You look good, Sophia observed as we settled at our table. Better than I expected, given everything. I smiled at her forthright manner, one of the qualities I had always appreciated about her. I've had time to adjust to the idea, I explained. Harold's announcement at Thanksgiving wasn't as shocking to me as it was to everyone else. You suspected? More than suspected. I hired a private investigator 3 years ago who confirmed the affair with Margaret. Sophia's eyebrows rose. And you didn't confront him then? I considered how to explain the complex calculations that had guided my decisions during those years. I needed to be certain my financial position was secure before forcing a confrontation. And honestly, part of me was waiting to see if he would ever have the courage to tell me himself. Well, he certainly chose a dramatic moment for his confession, Sophia remarked dryly. Harold always did have a flair for timing, I agreed, unable to keep the sarcasm from my voice. Though I doubt he anticipated my countermove. Sophia leaned forward, curiosity evident in her expression. I've heard rumors, but I'd rather hear the truth from you. Did you really build a secret fortune right under his nose? Not so secret, I corrected. Just separate. I reported all income on our tax returns. I never used joint funds for my investments. I simply maintained financial independence while Harold assumed I was contentedly managing our home. And now? Now I have options, I said simply. A career I enjoy, investments that provide security, a home that's entirely mine. The divorce will be complicated, but I'm not facing it from a position of vulnerability. Sophia raised her water glass in a toast. To preparation and foresight. I clinked my glass against hers, appreciating her understanding. To women who plan ahead. Our conversation shifted to other topics. Mutual acquaintances, market trends, Sophia's upcoming retirement trip to Portugal. The normalcy was comforting. A reminder that life continued beyond the dissolution of my marriage. By late afternoon, light snow had begun to fall, dusting the city in a fine white powder that softened its hard edges. I returned to my condominium to prepare for Claire and Emma's visit, stopping to pick up groceries for breakfast the next morning. Though pizza was on the menu for dinner, I wanted to have options for breakfast that would appeal to a 7-year-old's tastes. The doorman greeted me warmly as I entered the building. Evening, Ms. Jenkins. Need a hand with those bags? I've got them. Thanks, Frank, I replied. My daughter and granddaughter will be visiting tonight. If they arrive before I get upstairs, please send them up. Of course, ma'am. In my condominium, I moved about with growing comfort, the space feeling more like home with each passing day. I had brought more of my personal belongings from the house, favorite books, the hand-woven throw my mother had given me years ago, family photographs in new frames that better suited my modern decor. I was arranging fresh flowers in a vase when the doorbell rang. Opening it, I was greeted by Emma's exuberant embrace, her small arms wrapping tightly around my waist. "Grandma, your house is in the sky!" she exclaimed, her face alight with excitement. I laughed, lifting her up for a proper hug. "Yes, it is. 14 floors up, to be exact." Claire followed, carrying a pizza box and a small overnight bag. "I hope you don't mind, but Emma asked if we could have a sleepover. Michael's out of town for a conference, and the idea of just us girls sounded appealing." "I don't mind at all," I assured her, genuinely pleased at the prospect. "The guest room is already made up." Emma wriggled free from my embrace and darted into the living room, pressing her face against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You can see everything from here." "Be careful, Emma," Claire cautioned. "Don't lean on the glass." I placed a reassuring hand on my daughter's shoulder. "The windows are perfectly safe, triple-paned and reinforced. She can't fall, even if she tries." Claire relaxed slightly. "Sorry. Mom instinct." "No need to apologize. I remember those instincts well." I took the pizza box from her and led the way to the kitchen. "How about we eat first, then give Emma the grand tour?" Over dinner, Emma chattered about school, her ballet class, and her upcoming birthday. "Will you come to my party, Grandma? It's at the Science Museum, and we get to see real dinosaur bones." I wouldn't miss it for anything, I promised, touched by her assumption that family events would continue unchanged despite the upheaval between her grandparents. Claire caught my eye over Emma's head. "Dad will be there too," she said quietly. "Is that going to be okay?" "Of course," I assured her. "Your father and I may not be together anymore, but we're both still Emma's grandparents. We can be civil for an afternoon." After dinner, I showed Emma around the condominium, smiling at her delight in small discoveries. The jetted tub in the guest bathroom, the window seat in what I was using as a home office, the small balcony, off the master bedroom where I sometimes had my morning coffee when the weather allowed. "Can I sleep out there?" she asked, peering through the glass doors at the snow-dusted balcony furniture. Claire laughed. "It's 20 degrees outside, honey. Not exactly camping weather." "Maybe in the summer," I suggested. "We could set up a little tent out there for a pretend campout." Emma's eyes widened at the prospect. "With s'mores?" "Definitely with s'mores," I agreed, though we might need to use the microwave instead of a campfire. While Claire supervised Emma's bedtime routine, I prepared a pot of tea and arranged some of the ginger snap cookies I'd purchased on a plate. When Claire joined me in the living room, we settled on opposite ends of the sofa, cups of steaming tea in hand. "She's finally asleep," Claire reported. All that excitement wore her out. "It's good to have her here," I said, realizing how much I had missed the everyday sounds of family life. A child's laughter, bedtime stories, the small domestic rhythms that had structured my days for so long. Claire studied me over the rim of her cup. "How are you really doing, Mom? The truth, not the composed version you've been presenting to everyone." The question caught me off guard. Claire had always been perceptive, but in recent years, our relationship had become more surface level, focused on practical matters and grandchildren, rather than deeper emotional truths. "I have good days and bad," I admitted after a moment. "Today was mostly good. The meeting with the attorneys went as well as could be expected. Your father was surprised by the extent of my separate assets." Claire smiled slightly. "I can imagine. Dad's always prided himself on being the financial wizard in the family." "Indeed." I took a sip of tea, gathering my thoughts. "The hardest part isn't the legal proceedings, or even the end of the marriage itself. It's coming to terms with how much of my life was built around a relationship that wasn't what I thought it was. 45 years is a long time to invest in, something that ultimately proved hollow." "Was it all hollow?" Claire asked softly. All 45 years? I considered her question carefully, wanting to be honest without diminishing the good memories that were also part of our family's history. No, not all of it. There were years of genuine connection, of shared joy in watching you and Robert grow, of building a life together. Your father and I did love each other once, very much. When did you first suspect about Margaret? About Margaret specifically? 5 years ago? But the distance between us, the sense that your father was living a separate life, that began much earlier. Perhaps around the time you left for college. Without the daily responsibilities of raising children, the emptiness at the core of our marriage became more apparent. Claire nodded, a shadow crossing her face. I remember coming home that first Thanksgiving break and feeling like something had changed. You and Dad were so polite to each other, but there was this tension I couldn't quite identify. Her perception surprised me. I had thought we had hidden our growing estrangement well, maintaining the facade of a happy marriage. For our children's sake, we tried to shield you and Robert from our issues. I know, Claire said, and I appreciate that you never put us in the middle. But children sense these things, even when adults think they're being discreet. We sat in companionable silence. For a while, the snow falling more heavily outside, creating a cocoon of quiet around us. What about you? I finally asked. How are you processing all this? Claire sighed, setting her cup down on the coffee table. It's strange. I'm angry at Dad for the affair, for lying to all of us for so long. But I'm also trying to understand how a marriage reaches that point, where secrets and separate lives seem easier than honest communication. I heard the unspoken question in her words. Was she learning the wrong lessons from my failed marriage? Was her own relationship with Michael vulnerable to similar fractures? Every marriage is different, I told her gently. What happened? Between your father and me doesn't predetermine anything about your relationship with Michael. But it makes me think, she admitted, about honesty, about independence, about what I would do if faced with similar circumstances. I hope you never are, I said sincerely. But if I could offer any wisdom from my experience, it would be this. Financial independence is not a lack of trust in your partner. It's an acknowledgement that life is unpredictable, and that being prepared for any eventuality is an act of self-respect. Claire considered this, then nodded slowly. I've been thinking about going back to work part-time now that Emma's in school. All day. Maybe it's time. If that's what you want, I think it's a wonderful idea, I encouraged her. Your medical training is too valuable to let languish indefinitely. I've been out of practice for 7 years, she reminded me. Getting back in won't be easy. Few worthwhile things are, I replied, but you've always thrived on challenges. Our conversation continued late into the evening, touching on Claire's tentative career plans, Emma's upcoming transition to 2nd grade, and eventually circling back to the practical aspects of the divorce proceedings. Throughout, I was struck by the new quality of openness between us, as if the revelation of my secret life had somehow freed Claire to be more honest about her own concerns and aspirations. When we finally retired for the night, I lay awake for some time, listening to the soft sounds of my daughter and granddaughter sleeping in the next room. There was comfort in their presence, in the knowledge that despite the dissolution of my marriage, these essential bonds remained intact, perhaps even strengthened by the honesty that had replaced years of careful pretense. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the world outside transformed by several inches of pristine snow. Emma was the first awake, bouncing into my bedroom with the boundless energy of childhood. Grandma, it snowed so much. Can we go play in it, please? I glanced at the clock, barely 7, but I was already awake, contemplating the day ahead. Let's have breakfast first, sweetheart. Then we can see about snowplay. In the kitchen, I prepared French toast with cinnamon and fresh berries, one of Emma's favorites. Claire joined us as I was flipping the last pieces, her hair tousled from sleep, looking younger and more relaxed than I had seen her in months. "Something smells amazing," she murmured, making a beeline for the coffee maker I had already started. "Grandma's making French toast with extra cinnamon," Emma announced importantly, "and I'm helping by setting the table." "So I see," Claire smiled, inspecting her daughter's creative arrangement of napkins and silverware. Very artistic. As we ate, I found myself savoring not just the food but the moment itself. This simple family breakfast in my new home, free from the tension that had permeated our gatherings for so long. There was a rightness to it, a sense of pieces falling into place after years of misalignment. After breakfast, we bundled up and ventured to a small park near my building, where Emma immediately set about constructing a snowman with the single-minded focus only children can muster. Claire and I helped, rolling increasingly larger snowballs across the fresh powder, laughing as Emma insisted on precise placement of coal eyes and a carrot nose she had brought specifically for this purpose. "You came prepared," I observed, impressed by her foresight. "Mom says always bring a carrot if it might snow," Emma explained seriously, "in case of snowman emergencies." I glanced at Claire, amused by this practical maternal wisdom. "Snowman emergencies?" She shrugged, grinning. "It's right up there with always having Band-Aids and snacks in your purse. Essential mom knowledge." As we put the finishing touches on our creation, a scarf donated from Claire's neck, sticks for arms carefully selected by Emma for optimal snowball throwing position, I was struck by a sense of déjà vu. Decades earlier, I had stood in a similar park with Claire and Robert, building snowmen while Harold was working late, preparing for an important meeting. How many of those meetings, I wondered now, had been with women other than his wife? How many family moments had he missed, not for the career advancement he claimed, but for stolen hours with Margaret or others before her? The question brought not pain, but a strange sense of clarity. What I had once accepted as dedication to providing for his family now revealed itself as dedication primarily to his own desires, his own gratification. And yet, those absences had created space for moments like this. Intimate family connections forged without him, memories that belonged solely to me and my children. My reverie was interrupted by a snowball landing squarely on my shoulder, followed by Emma's delighted giggle as she ducked behind our snowman. "Oh, is that how it's going to be?" I called, gathering snow for a gentle return volley. Soon all three of us were engaged in a spirited snowball fight, our laughter ringing out in the crisp morning air. By the time we declared a truce, we were breathless and snow-covered, cheeks pink from exertion and cold. "Hot chocolate time," Claire declared, brushing snow from her coat. "My treat at that cafe across the street." As we settled at a small table by the cafe window, my phone buzzed with an incoming call, Catherine's number flashing on the screen. "I need to take this," I explained, stepping away from the table. "It's my attorney." Claire nodded, understanding, turning her attention to helping Emma remove her wet mittens and hat. "Eleanor?" Catherine's voice was brisk. "I've just heard from Martin Geller. Harold is contesting your financial disclosures." I sighed, unsurprised but still disappointed. "On what grounds?" "He's claiming that since you were married when these investments were made, they should be considered marital property regardless of the source of funds. He's also requesting a forensic accountant to trace the origin of all your investment capital." "He won't find anything improper," I assured her. "Every penny is documented." "I know that," Catherine said. "But he's looking to delay and complicate the proceedings, hoping you'll agree to a less favorable settlement just to avoid the hassle." It was a typical Harold strategy, applying pressure until the other party capitulated out of exhaustion or frustration. He had used similar tactics in business negotiations throughout his career. "He's underestimating my patience," I told Catherine. And my resolve. That's what I thought you'd say. I've already arranged for our own forensic accountant to prepare a comprehensive report on your separate property. In the meantime, Harold is requesting access to the marital home to retrieve additional personal items. Are you comfortable with that? I considered the question. I had already removed anything of particular sentimental or financial value from the house. What remained were furnishings, Harold's personal effects, and household items I had no particular attachment to. That's fine, I agreed. Just ask that he give me advance notice of when he plans to be there. After ending the call, I rejoined Claire and Emma, finding them deep in discussion about the optimal ratio of marshmallows to hot chocolate. Everything okay? Claire asked, noting my expression. Just some legal matters, I assured her, not wanting to burden her with the details of Harold's tactics. Nothing urgent. Emma pushed a mug toward me. I saved you the biggest marshmallow, Grandma. Thank you, sweetheart. That was very thoughtful. As I sipped my hot chocolate, watching Emma's animated description of the snow fort she planned to build next time, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Harold might attempt to complicate the divorce proceedings, to drag out the process in hopes of wearing me down, but he was facing a very different woman from the one he had married 45 years ago. That young bride had believed in romantic notions of partnership and sacrifice, had willingly stepped back from her own ambitions to support his, had accepted his absences and explanations without question. The woman I had become, the woman sitting in this cafe with her daughter and granddaughter, with a career of her own and financial security she had built herself, was not so easily intimidated or manipulated. Let him bring his legal challenges. Let him hire forensic accountants and delay tactics. In the end, the truth would prevail. I had created my separate life within the confines of a failing marriage, had protected myself within the bounds of the law, had prepared for exactly this moment when pretense would give way to reality. And in that reality, despite the complications ahead, I was exactly where I needed to be. Spring came slowly that year, reluctant green buds appearing on trees that had stood bare through the long winter months. By March, the divorce proceedings had settled into a predictable rhythm of legal maneuvers and countermoves. Harold's attempt to claim my separate assets as marital property failed, just as Catherine had predicted. The forensic accountant's report confirmed what I had always maintained, that my investments had been funded solely through my own earnings, meticulously documented over 2 decades. With that major hurdle cleared, negotiations shifted to the division of our truly joint property, the house, retirement accounts established during our marriage, artwork and antiques we had collected together. Harold, perhaps recognizing the futility of further aggressive tactics, became more reasonable in his demands. I, in turn, approached these negotiations with fairness rather than vindictiveness, wanting to end our marriage with as much dignity as possible. The first true thaw came in early April, bringing with it Emma's much-anticipated 8th birthday party at the Science Museum. It would be the first family gathering where Harold and I would both be present since the Thanksgiving revelation, and I approached it with a mixture of resolve and apprehension. Remember, you don't have to stay the entire time if it becomes uncomfortable, Robert advised during our weekly phone call. Emma will understand if you need to leave early. I have no intention of leaving early, I assured him. This is Emma's day, and both her grandparents will be there to celebrate it properly. True to my word, I arrived at the museum precisely at the scheduled time, bearing a carefully wrapped package containing the microscope Emma had been coveting for months. The exhibit hall had been transformed with dinosaur-themed decorations, tables set with prehistoric plates and cups, a cake shaped like a T-Rex waiting on a central table. Claire greeted me with a hug, her expression revealing her own nervousness about the day ahead. "Dad's not here yet," she murmured, "but he texted that he's on his way." "Everything looks wonderful," I told her, deliberately steering the conversation away from Harold. "Emma must be thrilled." She's been bouncing off the walls since 5 a.m., Claire confirmed with a smile. Currently, she's with the museum educator, getting a preview of the fossil activity they'll be doing later. I placed my gift on the designated table and helped Claire arrange final details, falling easily into the supportive maternal role I had played countless times over the years. Other families began arriving, Emma's classmates with their parents, neighbors, a few of Claire, and Michael's friends with children Emma's age. I was chatting with Michael's mother when Harold entered, and I felt, rather than saw, the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Conversations didn't stop, but they quieted slightly, attention momentarily diverted to observe this potentially awkward encounter. Harold paused just inside the doorway, scanning the room until his gaze found me. After a moment's hesitation, he approached, a gaily wrapped package tucked under his arm. "Eleanor," he greeted me, his voice carefully neutral. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Harold," I replied with equal neutrality. "You too." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, broken when Michael's mother tactfully excused herself to get a drink, leaving us alone. "I wasn't sure if Margaret would be joining you today," I said, deciding directness was preferable to awkward small talk. Harold shook his head. "We agreed it would be better, less complicated for everyone, if she didn't attend family functions for the time being." I nodded, appreciating this concession to the family's comfort, even as I wondered how Margaret felt about being relegated to the background of Harold's life after 12 years together. "Emma will be glad you're here," I offered, a small olive branch. Whatever my feelings toward Harold, he was still a grandparent who loved Emma and whom she adored in return. "And I'm glad you're here too," he replied, surprising me with what seemed like genuine sentiment. "I know this can't be easy." Before I could respond, Emma burst into the room, her face lighting up at the sight of the assembled guests. "It's party time," she announced, prompting laughter from the adults and excited cheers from her friends. Emma spotted Harold and me, standing together, and raced over, throwing her arms around both of us simultaneously. "My grandparents are both here," she exclaimed, as if this were the greatest gift she could have received. In that moment, with Emma's arms creating a physical connection between Harold and me, I felt a sharp pang of what might have been. The family celebrations we might have continued to share if different choices had been made, if honesty had prevailed over deception, if commitment had won out over convenience. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the practical reality of guiding overexcited children through museum exhibits, supervising fossil excavation activities, serving dinosaur-shaped sandwiches and prehistoric punch. Harold and I maintained a careful distance throughout the party, interacting primarily through Emma rather than directly with each other. It wasn't until the cake had been cut and presents opened that Harold approached me again, finding a moment. When I stood alone, watching Emma demonstrate her new microscope to a group of fascinated friends. "She's so much like you," he observed, following my gaze. "That same intensity of focus, the curiosity about how things work." The comparison startled me. Throughout Emma's life, people had more often noted her resemblance to Harold, particularly in her expressions and mannerisms. "I've always seen more of you in her," I admitted. Harold smiled slightly. "Perhaps we both contributed the best parts of ourselves, and that's what shows up in her." It was a surprisingly generous observation, one that acknowledged our shared history without attempting to rewrite it. I found myself nodding in agreement. "Eleanor," Harold continued, his voice lower now, "I owe you an apology. Not just for the affair, but for how I've handled everything since Thanksgiving. The legal tactics, the challenges to your financial disclosures. It was petty and beneath both of us." I studied him, trying to discern the sincerity behind his words. Harold had always been skilled at saying what others wanted to hear, at presenting himself in the most favorable light possible. Yet there seemed to be genuine regret in his expression now. "Why the change of heart?" I asked directly. Harold sighed, glancing around the room before returning his gaze to me. Perspective, I suppose. Seeing our family together today, watching Emma's joy at having both her grandparents here. It made me realize that what matters now isn't who gets what in the divorce, but how we move forward from it. I nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in his statement without fully committing to forgiveness. I appreciate that, Harold. And, for Emma's sake, for all our grandchildren, I hope we can establish a civil relationship moving forward. I'd like that, he said quietly. And I've instructed Martin to withdraw the remaining objections to your financial disclosures. You built that life for yourself fairly. I was just blindsided by it. Thank you, I replied, genuinely surprised by this concession. That will simplify matters considerably. An awkward silence fell between us, 45 years of shared history making small talk impossible, but deeper conversation too fraught for this public setting. Well, Harold finally said, straightening his shoulders slightly, I should say goodbye to Emma. I have a dinner meeting this evening. I nodded, not commenting on the familiar excuse that had punctuated so many family gatherings over the decades. I'm sure she'll want a proper goodbye. As Harold moved away, I felt a curious lightness, as if a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted. His apology, however belated, offered a kind of closure I hadn't realized I was seeking. Not forgiveness, exactly. The pain of betrayal was too deep for that, but perhaps acceptance, a mutual recognition that what was broken could not be repaired, only respectfully dismantled. The divorce was finalized in May. The legal proceedings concluded with surprising efficiency once Harold withdrew his objections to my separate assets. We divided the marital property fairly, with Harold taking some of the artwork and antiques he had particularly valued, while I kept family heirlooms and pieces with sentimental significance. The house, our home for nearly 4 decades, was sold, the proceeds divided equally between us. I felt a momentary pang as I walked through the empty rooms one final time, memories echoing in spaces now stripped of the furnishings and decorations that had made them ours. But the sadness was tempered by anticipation for the future I was building, a life shaped entirely by my own choices rather than compromise or accommodation. My condominium no longer felt like a secret refuge but simply home, a space I had created for myself, filled with objects I had chosen, arranged according to my preferences alone. I hired an interior designer to help me finish furnishing rooms that had remained sparse during the transition period, enjoying the process of selecting pieces that reflected my personal taste rather than the traditional style Harold had preferred. With the divorce concluded and my new home established, I turned my attention more fully to my financial advising practice. What had begun as a modest part-time career had grown into a thriving business, with a client list that included dozens of women in situations similar to what mine had been. Professionally capable but financially uncertain, seeking guidance and building security independent of their partners. In June, I made a decision that had been forming in my mind for months. I would establish a foundation focused on financial education for women, particularly those emerging from long-term marriages with limited understanding of investment strategies or retirement planning. Using a portion of my investment proceeds, I created an endowment that would fund workshops, one-on-one counseling, and educational materials designed to empower women to take control of their financial futures. The announcement of the Eleanor Jenkins Foundation for Women's Financial Empowerment generated more attention than I had anticipated. Local media covered the launch event, featuring interviews with me and several clients whose financial independence I had helped establish. The publicity brought a flood of new clients to my practice, along with speaking invitations from women's organizations and business groups across the state. Claire attended the foundation's launch party, her pride evident as she watched me address the assembled guests. I never realized what a badass my mother is, she confided to Robert, unaware that I was within earshot. All those years, I thought she was just Dad's supportive wife. I had no idea she was building this whole other life. "I'm not entirely surprised," Robert replied. "Remember how she always managed the household budget? How she could stretch Dad's salary to cover everything we needed, plus extras like music? Lessons and summer camps? She's always had a head for numbers." Their conversation warmed me, not just for their evident pride, but for the recognition of skills I had demonstrated throughout their childhood, even before I began my secret career. I had always been more than Harold's wife, more than their mother. I had been a woman with talents and capabilities that found expression first in managing our family's resources and later in building my own financial security. Summer brought a new rhythm to my life. Without the constraints of Harold's schedule or preferences, I found myself exploring interests long set aside: botanical photography, ballroom dancing, even a weekend sailing course that rekindled the love of water I had enjoyed in my youth. I traveled, sometimes alone and sometimes with newfound friends from my expanded social circle. A weekend in New York for a Broadway show, a week in Maine staying at a quaint bed and breakfast overlooking the Atlantic, a photography workshop in Arizona's canyon country. Through it all, I maintained close connections with my family. Sunday dinners with Claire, Michael, and Emma became a tradition, sometimes at my condominium and sometimes at their home. Robert and his family visited monthly, his teenage sons, gradually warming to my new living situation, particularly after I installed a gaming system in the guest room specifically for their visits. Harold and I encountered each other at family events, birthdays, school performances, Robert's promotion celebration, maintaining the civil relationship we had established at Emma's party. There was no pretense of friendship, but neither was their overt hostility. We had reached a détente of sorts, acknowledging our shared past and mutual connection to our children and grandchildren without attempting to rewrite the history that had led to our separation. In September, almost a year after Harold's Thanksgiving announcement, I received an unexpected invitation. Margaret had contacted Claire, requesting a private meeting with me. After considerable thought, I agreed, suggesting a neutral location, a quiet cafe near the harbor where neither of us was likely to encounter acquaintances. Margaret arrived precisely on time, looking more nervous than I had ever seen her. Gone was the confident woman who had stood beside Harold at the open house nearly a year earlier, replaced by someone who seemed smaller somehow, less certain. "Thank you for meeting me," she began after we had ordered coffee. "I know this is unusual." "Unusual is one word for it," I agreed, curious about her motivation for this encounter, but determined to maintain my composure. Margaret twisted her napkin between manicured fingers. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally. "Not for loving Harold. I can't apologize for that. But for the deception, for the years of secrecy that hurt you and your family." I studied her, seeing not the homewrecker of my imagination, but a woman who had made choices just as I had, though very different ones. "Why now?" I asked. "It's been almost a year since everything came out. We're divorced. The damage is done." She nodded, acknowledging the truth in my statement. "Several reasons, I suppose. Partly because Harold and I we're struggling. The reality of building a life together is proving more complicated than the fantasy we maintained for so many years." This admission surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Relationships born in secrecy and deception rarely thrived when brought into the light. "And partly," Margaret continued, "because I've been following your foundation, the work you're doing to help women become financially independent. It's impressive. Inspiring, actually." Now I was truly startled. "You've been following my foundation?" "Yes, I attended one of your workshops last month, sat in the back, left before the networking portion. What you're teaching women to do, to build security for themselves, to plan for contingencies. It's work I wish someone had done for me decades ago." "I'm not sure I understand," I said, genuinely confused by this turn in the conversation. Margaret sighed, setting down her mangled napkin. Harold isn't the first married man I've been involved with, Eleanor. My pattern, getting involved with unavailable men, waiting years for promises that never materialize. It started long before him, and it's left me in a precarious position now, with limited savings, no career to speak of, and complete financial dependence on a man who— She trailed off, apparently reconsidering what she had been about to say. Who has a history of infidelity? I suggested, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. Margaret winced, but nodded. Yes, that. The irony wasn't lost on me, that the woman who had participated in deceiving me for 12 years was now worried about being deceived herself. Yet I felt an unexpected twinge of sympathy for her situation, recognizing the vulnerability that came with financial dependence, the limitations it placed on one's choices. What exactly are you asking of me, Margaret? Nothing specific, she said quickly. Just understanding, perhaps, and permission to continue attending your foundation's workshops. I want to learn what you're teaching, how to build security. For myself, how to ensure I have options no matter what happens with Harold. I considered her request, weighing my lingering resentment against the mission I had established for my foundation, to help all women achieve financial independence, regardless of their circumstances or past choices. The workshops are open to any woman who wants to learn, I finally said. You don't need my permission to attend them. Relief flooded her expression. Thank you, Eleanor. That means more than you know. As our awkward meeting concluded, I found myself reflecting on the strange turns life could take. A year ago, I never could have imagined sitting across from Margaret, offering even this small measure of acceptance. Yet here we were, two women approaching our senior years, both trying to secure our futures after decades of choices that had led us to very different places. Walking home along the harbor, I paused to watch sailboats gliding across the bay, their white sails bright against the deep blue water. The September air held a hint of autumn crispness, a reminder that seasons change, bringing new colors, new temperatures, new possibilities. My life had undergone its own change of seasons, from the spring of young marriage and motherhood, through the long summer of family life and hidden career building, into what might have been the autumn of quiet, retirement alongside Harold. Instead, I found myself in an unexpected new season, not defined by his presence or absence, but by my own choices, my own achievements, my own carefully constructed independence. That evening, as I prepared for a dinner party I was hosting for several colleagues from the foundation, my phone rang, Claire's number appearing on the screen. Mom, she began without preamble. I've been offered a position at Children's Hospital. Part-time to start, 3 days a week in the pediatric clinic. Claire, that's wonderful, I exclaimed, genuinely delighted by her news. We had discussed her desire to return to medical practice several times over recent months, but she had been hesitant about the impact on Emma and uncertain of her prospects after years away from clinical work. It's because of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Watching you rebuild your life this past year, seeing how you've turned your secret career into something so meaningful, it gave me the courage to try. Her words touched me deeply, bringing unexpected tears to my eyes. You've always had courage, I told her. You just needed to recognize it in yourself. Maybe, she acknowledged, but having an example helped. Seeing you stand on your own, create this new life that's entirely yours, it changed how I think about my own choices, my own potential. After we hung up, I stood by the window of my condominium, gazing out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Claire's words echoed in my mind, reminding me that our actions ripple outward in ways we can't always anticipate or control. When Harold announced his affair that Thanksgiving Day, destroying the carefully maintained facade of our marriage, I had revealed my secret fortune as an act of self-preservation, a declaration of independence in the face of betrayal. I hadn't considered then how that revelation might influence others, my daughter, my colleagues, even Margaret herself. Yet that moment of truth, painful as it was, had set in motion changes that extended far beyond my personal circumstances. My foundation was helping women I would never meet. Claire was returning to the medical career she had set aside. Even Margaret was seeking financial literacy, perhaps breaking a cycle of dependence that had defined her life for decades. As I turned from the window to complete preparations for my dinner party, I felt a profound sense of rightness. Not smugness or vindication, but quiet certainty that I had found my proper path. The one that aligned my public life with my private values after years of necessary separation between the two. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of my first guests. I smoothed my dress, checked my reflection once in the hallway mirror, and moved to welcome them into my home. The home I had created, the life I had built, the future I had secured, through years of patience, planning, and the courage to finally stand in my own truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.